Kia ora koutou, ko Ayla Barfoot tuku ingoa. Lovely to have you all joining us for our March hot take. This is our most popular hot take so far, so excellent to see so many people interested in this topic. And today we're talking about the egg shortage is just the beginning. So we have some excellent speakers lined up for you today. I'm very, very excited to hear from both of them, giving us kind of a zoom in and a zoom out on this topic. So first up, we're going to have Angela from Kiwi Harvest, who is the CEO of Kiwi Harvest. And then we have Emily King, who is a food expert and runs a company called Spira. So, sorry, just letting in a few more people and then we will pass along. This hot take actually came up when I went and visited with some other SBN team members, Angela, at Kiwi Harvest, and we got to hear a bit about their awesome work. If you're not aware, Kiwi Harvest do food rescue and then distribute that food out to people who need it, and are kind of filling a gap of food wastage. As we know, this is a huge problem in New Zealand, and it was really awesome to see their facilities and all the great work they're doing. But we're going to see food scarcity kind of continue, and as we're all aware, when we're in the supermarkets at the moment, a lot of those food prices are getting pretty scary. So the work that Kiwi Harvest is doing is even more important as that comes about. So we had this discussion of why were we seeing so few eggs in the supermarket, and then Angela was able to give me a bit of a brief explanation, which she'll expand on today. So that'll be really great. So now we have pretty much everyone joining in. I'm going to pass along to Angela to kick us off. Just remember that we'll have lots of time for Q&A at the end. So you're welcome to either pop your questions in the chat and we'll get to them once we get to the Q&A portion, or at the end you can pop your camera on and ask a question out loud and have a discussion with us. So pass along to you, Angela. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Ayla. Morning, everybody. As Ayla said, I'm Angela. I work at Kiwi Harvest, Chief Entertainment Officer. Got to keep the staff and our donors and our recipients happy. We're really proud of the work that we do, and I guess you know, the whole egg shortage, food scarcity topic is something that we keep a very close watching eye on, as we are very cognizant about when we do food rescue and then supply to our recipient agencies, trying to give a balance across the food basket. So while it's great when we get donations of chocolate in, we don't want to be handing chocolate out in great quantities. So we try and give a variety of product from produce, protein, dairy, carbohydrate, to ensure that when the food parcel goes out, it has a balanced diet within the box. So keeping an eye on food commodities and what's happening is something that we do take quite seriously at Kiwi Harvest. It also kind of comes naturally to me, as I worked for a global food company for 6 years in the supply chain department, really. So I've just got a PowerPoint to share with you all. And I guess when Ayla and the team from SBN and I were talking, this egg shortage is a real worry for the food rescue and the organisations that are providing food parcels, as you know, eggs are a superfood, really. One egg's got 75 calories, 7 grams of protein, 5 grams of fat, 1 gram of saturated fat, along with iron, vitamins, minerals. The egg's really a powerhouse. And it is a great way to feed a family. Well, it was a great way to feed a family for quite low cost. That has changed with eggs being around around $1 each now, and that is only set to increase. And the factors that led to that shortage are around a change in legislation around no caged eggs. So that's animal welfare driven piece of legislation. But what that means for the egg industry is that there's increased capital and space requirements to have the same amount of layers. It's about a 5% increase in space requirements and about a 10-fold in capital, because even though, you know, it's free range, those barns are expensive, and the chemicals that come off of chicken droppings actually eat into the bottom of the barns quite quickly, a lot quicker than a lot of other buildings that you would have for food production. There's also a shortage of feed, which I will touch on soon, that comes into the whole grain area. There was a fire that killed 50,000 chickens, and 50,000, I think our population for layers is around, I want to say 600,000, so that was quite a hit. And then there is a high demand on the hens that are laying. Now, within the animal welfare, while we were trying to get away from having 4, 5, 6 hens in quite a small cage, by putting them in a population base, it's actually a lot more stressful for them because, and this is one thing I tell my kids often, sayings become sayings because they're true. The whole pecking order, when you go from an environment with 4 to 6 hens, the pecking order was easy for them to sort out. You put them in a barn with a couple of thousand chickens, that pecking order is hard to sort out, and it's something that actually stresses the hens almost every day. So you do get a lot more mortality around chickens killing chickens. The issue around disease control is harder as well. So there are a lot of factors that are leading into our egg shortage. And unfortunately, I think it is just the beginning. Just a disclosure, I'm not a food economist. I'm not giving you full-on advice. This is something that, like I said, I keep a close watching eye on due to wanting to feed as many people as I can each day, I guess. So I believe there is more to come, and these are from food economists. These are snippets that I have grabbed. So there is an expected 345.2 million people projected to be food insecure in 2023, more than double the number in 2020. Obviously, this is a global number. This constitutes a staggering rise of 200 million people compared to pre-COVID. More than 900,000 people worldwide are fighting to survive in famine-like conditions. I feel very lucky to live in New Zealand. My kids have never known what it's like to be hungry, even though they stand in front of the fridge and say there's nothing to eat in here, or in front of the pantry. There are going to be people that actually open up the fridge and the pantry and there's going to be nothing in there, more so in New Zealand than we've seen before. It was a bad year for food shortages in 2022, including eggs. Baby formula, particularly in the US, was the leading product that was requested. There was actually riots in supermarkets for mums to get hold of baby formula for their children. And you know, the advice on the internet is to start stocking, but there's always a balance for that because we don't want toilet paper gate again here in New Zealand. But there are products that you should probably hold a few more of. Why is this happening? So there's two huge factors: the war in Ukraine, picture on the right, and the heat wave that hit Asia. That's the Yangtze River in Shanghai, third largest river in the world. And I've been to China a number of times. It always had plenty of water in it. It's actually run dry. So there's a lot of products that come from these two areas. So what is predicted to be in short supply? Corn. A lot of corn comes out of Ukraine and out of the east. Wheat, Ukraine and Russia, big players. Wheat makes up about 20% of the globe's calorific intake, and it's predicted that we'll lose over half of the wheat market. Vegetable oil, so Indonesia has decided to stop exporting vegetable oil, and China once again. You can see on the right, this is the picture of the globe. The intense red is the heat wave that hit China and Asia. Baby formula won't be such an issue for us in New Zealand, thank goodness, because of the high amount of dairy product that we produce. Champagne, I just threw that one in there. There was a 64% increase in sales of champagne in 2022. So in 2023, if you've got special stuff coming up, stock up on this champagne. Otherwise, there might not be a bottle to crack. Canned food. So worldwide, there is an aluminium shortage. Pet food is problematic, but other canned food will be affected by the aluminium shortage, and rice. So that's down to this Asia heat wave. There was in China about 500,000 hectares of rice paddies that were seared beyond repair by the heat wave. So rice, we will have some issues coming up. There's also the pull on global supplies. So between 2000 and 2020, China's food self-sufficiency ratio decreased from 93.6% to 65.8%. So some of that is around the changing diet and the westernization of China. So they're importing a lot more product than they ever did. Edible oils, sugar, meat, and processed food. The imports into China have risen significantly in the last 2 decades, and I don't see that declining. I've also given you a picture here of the global wheat price. This is only running into 2022. It's actually, I was looking yesterday for an up-to-date one, but I couldn't find one. So you can see back in 1996 and 2008, and in 2022 with the Ukraine war, it's heading right back up there. So hopefully it will deter people from throwing away bread. Put a celery stick in with your loaf of bread in the plastic bag. It keeps bread for almost double the time, but it is our most wasted food product that ends up in the bin. So a stick of celery makes your bread last twice as long. So what can you do? Food, we will see it more and more as a vital resource. I mean, it's vital because we need to eat, obviously, but some things that you can do are around planning your weekly menu, shop to the menu, grow some veggies, first in and first out. I know it's a logistics thing and I work in a logistics company, but first into the fridge or the pantry, first out. Do a stock take of your pantry and your freezer items and use those. Don't do the deals. So a 2-for-1 deal, it's actually proven that most of the time the second that you get for cheap goes in the bin. And what I would say is as you go around your supermarket shelves, have a look at the items that are imported and you'll start to see that we'll get more and more holes, and that's around those supply chain disruptions that we still haven't fixed yet. You might want to put some stock aside of those. Yeah, so that's it from me, Ayla.
Thank you so much, Angela. That was really, really interesting and great to hear it from a global point of view, but like having those tips at the end as well. As I know, amongst people I talk to, we're all starting to feel that stress of those supermarket bills going up, and it doesn't seem to be going down anytime soon. So yeah, very topical. Thank you. Emily, I'll pass along to you next, but I'll just remind people that we will have lots of time for Q&A at the end here. So just keep noting down any questions you have as our presenters speak. But thank you, Emily, over to you.
Ngā mihi nui, Ayla and Angela. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Emily King taku ingoa. I te puaki i Aotearoa i a Taranaki, ko Waihiki, tuku kāinga a Nainai. I run Spira and I cultivate change in the food system. And it's my great pleasure to be here today speaking with you all about this. I just wanted to do a big mihi to Angela for that great presentation and for all the work that Kiwi Harvest does, and SBN for hosting, and kia ora to any members or investors out there that I know that might be on there. I can't see everybody, but hello to you all. So yeah, I run Spira. We are a food systems, I guess, activator of change across all aspects of it. And so today, just backing up and supporting Angela on some of these topics, I think it's really timely to be speaking about the food system. And when we do that, I actually really like to, oh, hang on, I need to go back into Zoom to share my screen. I really like to start with an overview of the food system because I think it's an important place. So just bear with me as I pull up my slides and get you guys out the way so I can see what I'm looking at. This is our beautiful food system, simplified and recently updated with some new look Spira design collateral that's coming out. We have a very complicated, international, far-reaching food system. It spans 196 countries around the globe and billions of people. Okay, and we need to remember that. But what I like to do is break it down into a simplified food wheel so that we can get our heads around it, because it's super important. And it's also a great place to start so that we're on the same page and we know what we're talking about, because everybody's got different ideas. And in our Spira food system wheel, we always start with the environment, te tau. We always talk about, sorry, te tau, we always speak about the land, the soil and the water and the sunlight where our food comes from, because without that we actually don't have food. So it's really important to know that that's where food comes from, even food that's grown not out on the land. The next stage within that is production. So those are our wonderful farmers and growers out there making the food for us every day all around the world that you will be familiar with. Manufacturing, well, that's our food processors, our plants, as in factory plants where we make the food. And along the way between production and manufacturing and then selling, we have our distributors, our logistics, our shipping, freight, transportation, and really large logistical networks of food delivery. And then selling is the retail point of the food system. So that's looking at the interface you're probably most familiar with, which would be your stores where you purchase food, supermarkets and whatnot, or online, which is still a store of sorts. And then finally, we have the final purpose of the food system, which is to feed people. And that's the eating part. So this is where people either do or do not have access to food and are able or not able to eat. So when we're talking about our food system, this is what we're looking at. And when we're thinking about whether and where it's broken or where there's impacts or what's happening, it pays to think about it in the bigger picture, because there are so many different agencies, organizations, trade, economic reasons, geopolitical factors that all come into play to make this system work or not work for people. So I just wanted to start there. Now, just picking up on the topic of today and building and supporting what Angela's been saying about this, when we look at this bigger picture. Okay, I just need to readjust my layout here. So an interesting thing to think about, we've been speaking and hearing from Angela about food supply and scarcity of this. And I think it's really important to put this in the context of food security. So this is when people have physical and economic access to sufficient and safe and nutritious food. And so I think it's really important to put that in this context. So I'm just going to spend a minute or so just looking at this quickly. Actually, you know what I'm thinking? I might just pause there, actually, just based on what we covered earlier with Angela. So we'll just leave that as a food for thought. And I'm just going to switch it up a little bit now and just talk about this in the global context, because that's where we spent most of the first part of this morning's talk. And Angela actually pointed to this. It was on the graph around the price of wheat. So I guess one of the biggest examples of where we saw failure of the food system was in 2007 and 2008 when we had the global food crisis. And so in that situation, this was really an example of where we saw the fragility of our food system and the sensitivity of the world's food system to physical, economic, and political forces. And there were it was basically a perfect storm in 2007 and 8, and it's really worth remembering this in the context of where we're at now. So this was a combination of poor seasons for growth of food in some regions. The price of energy and inputs was really high at that time. There was a large economic growth boom that had happened, and an associated corollary of that is dietary preferences and changes and shifts. And when diets change, so do preferences, and so does the demand on certain foods. And this growth and diet shift drove a strong demand, particularly in countries that were in Asia. And then also there was a low global food stock, so there wasn't that much availability. And then also a rapid expansion in that time of grains and foods into biofuels, which doesn't really happen in the same way, because we've learned from that if we take up all our space and energy to grow food for fuel, we don't have food to feed people. And so there were big shifts after that. So basically after that, and there were these political responses where countries started to ban exports in order to double down and just preserve what they've got. And so it all led to these factors that reinforced each other and drove the prices up. So that's really worth remembering at this point. And then Angela went into this with some great examples there around what's happening right now. So I think it's important to put this in context. We've just come, where we're still in, but we've just had the biggest impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the food system happening. And already when Russia invaded Ukraine, we were already struggling in the global food system because of this, right as COVID hit. And it just so happens that Ukraine and Russia are both massive growers and suppliers to the global market of these food commodities. So it really has led to it jeopardized the food system. And I won't repeat, because Angela did a great job of explaining some of that. So last year was a real challenge actually around that. But what we saw was some pretty strong efforts come out, particularly the EU, to try and avert this total disaster and not repeat what happened in 2007 and 8. So we had the Black Sea Grain Initiative that came out. So basically all the grain that could go out of the ports in Ukraine was blocked for months and months by Russia. And the EU came up with a different kind of agreement, which would basically purchase the grain directly from smaller Ukrainian growers and still give them an option. And that actually released some of that pressure. And then there was also a global humanitarian effort to try and mitigate this impact of the war based on a lot of knowing of what had happened before. So this has actually meant that it's not as bad as they thought it was going to be. It's still really bad, of course, in terms of the pressure on the supplies. And what we've seen now is countries have banned a lot of the exports because of the rising prices. So we have export bans, which means people just want to hold on to the stock of what they've got. That's not really how global trade works, and that means that it puts more pressure on it. So, and then another compounding factor is the rising, well, these are reasons leading to the global food inflation. And we're looking at like pretty much every single country in the world, bar a handful of them, with between 5 and 30%, some above 30% inflation on their food, year on year increases percentage-wise since 2022. So I'm putting this in the context of New Zealand because we're not the only ones dealing with this, with the 10% inflation on food from the year before. About 190 other countries are dealing with this, and some with, you know, double digits of percent. Well, we are almost in double digits, but with higher rates. And then, of course, the other massive issue is climate change and the impact of that on the supply of foods globally. So those are really big factors that come into food supply. And when we're looking at food security, which is ensuring that people have access to food at a national level and global level, that's really important. Oh, there we go. So, and I just need to once again reshuffle my view so I can see what I'm talking to here. Oh, that's good. I can just hide it. There's actually 4 factors that come into play with this, and here we go. That's better. Well, the physical availability of food is basically what Angela and I have been talking about most of this morning. This is the supply side. The second is the economic and physical factors around access to food. And this is what Kiwi Harvest and many other rescue agencies and charities work with every day. So this is the ability for people to be able to pay for the food, afford it, and also physically get the food. Okay, so it's not just about being able to buy it, it's also being able to, it's not only about being able to buy it financially, being able to afford it, but it's also about physically being able to get it. Then the third factor is what that food does in your body. So is that nourishing your body? Is it nutritious? And what does that look like? So those 3 factors need to be stable factors over time for food security to be happening within a population, or even actually within a household or an intercommunity situation, not only at a global level. So if you have this on and off, you're actually not food secure. So that's what the 4th element is. It's ensuring that this is continuous or simultaneous, and that these factors are happening simultaneously. So it's kind of it sounds kind of complex, but it's also quite logical, right? Like, you need to get the food coming in to the country. You need to be able to actually go and buy it. You need to have nourishing food that's working for your body. Otherwise, if you're just eating crappy food or not having all the nutrients, you also won't be healthy. And that has to happen continuously so we can survive. And yeah, so this is what happens when there's food shortages. It really affects this. And this happens at a national level. I guess my point, and the reason I spent so much time looking at that global picture just before, is that I want you to really remember that this is not only New Zealand that's facing this at all. This is happening around the world right now in a mass way. And that's because the global food system is global. That's because we're all interconnected. That's because all the different aspects of it touch on each other and are interconnected. And this is at a global geopolitical, trade, and economic level, and it's also at the practical supply chain level for a food business and the sourcing of their products. And so I think this trickles down to what we see on our shelves. The egg example is a unique one in many ways due to the factors that Angela went through around changing regulation and things. But this, in terms of physically having stock on the shelves, this is because of these bigger reasons here. And so, you know, these shortages and these price increases, they start to get us to rethink things a little bit. And I think we need to go further. I think we actually need to wake up around this because it's not new. We should have learned a lot more in 2007 and 8 in the global financial crisis and the response. Yeah, we could have done a lot more as countries following that, knowing also what the impacts will be on the production of food with the impacts of climate change in our regions. And when we look back at that diagram, you know, we can do some really great things to strengthen the resilience of our food system. Resilience is different to food security. It's the capacity of the system to absorb shocks and to continue and to operate with feeding people in a different way, but still able to do that if there's a shock like a storm or an earthquake or a pandemic or any other, or a war or things like this. So, you know, how resilient is that system? And really, we can be a lot more resilient than what we are. We're basically not that resilient at all. Some of the ways, and Angela had some really great tips in terms of your own household, and I think also we can think about our regions where we're living, regions being not the New Zealand region or the North or South Island, but your, say, regional region, and also your local food system. So strengthening the role of our regional and local food systems is a really good way of strengthening the resilience of our national food system. We're very fortunate in this country that we can produce a large amount of food. We can't and don't, well, we can, but we don't produce a lot of grains and things like that, but we definitely export very high quality, high nutrient dense products like meats and dairy and others. And then generally our import balance is that we import a lot of the crappy food, high sugars, highly processed foods. But we know, and this is why the work of charities and organisations like Kiwi Harvest and Food Rescue happens, we know that people don't have access to food here, even under normal food conditions. And we know that when the global system's under pressure and there's a lot of this stuff happening, that it's actually the poorest people without access to food that get the pinch. So if you're well off and you're in the supermarket and, oh, there's no eggs, then your family's protein needs, well, you might go and just stock up on more meat or more tofu or whatever it is that you can afford. But if that's a dietary staple and an affordable one for some families, well, you don't have that option and you're not going to be doing that. So I think that we have to remember that when these large global factors affect us, the people that feel the pinch and bear the brunt of that are the people already suffering within our food system. And, you know, when we've got about 20% of people who are in food insecure across our country, then it's a real wake-up call around that. So obviously, yeah, there's some practical things you can do around that. I think also something that I often reflect on and talk to people about, not in this context directly, but it's relevant, is this idea that if you keep it simple, it's actually a lot easier. The supply chains and the global trade of food and where it all goes, they're highly complex, and, you know, that leads to challenges. The simpler and the more traceable the food is that you eat, it's usually healthier, it's usually easier to follow. You can understand whether it came from New Zealand and where it came from. You can understand what you're putting into your body, what you're feeding to your family, if you have a family, and those sorts of things. So, you know, traceability and transparency is your friend in all of this. And I think that we should remember that, because I think we get really wowed by these basically food marketers that want us to have complex things, or they are selling us ideas as solutions to our busy and tired lives, but actually we could do a lot better by just making it way more simple for ourselves. Yeah, so that is what I wanted to say about that. I say a lot of stuff about food systems. I would love to connect with you. This is Spira. That's our website. If you go on there, you get a prompt to sign up for our newsletter, which is where you get a bit more information, or if you're on Facebook and Instagram. We are about to actually launch a new website for, yeah, which is great, after a bit of a new look after 5 years. And I run trainings, and I also run facilitations of topics around food systems change. So that's a great way to find out what we're doing on there. And then personally, you can connect with me. That's me on Instagram, my email address. You can find me on LinkedIn. I write a column on The Crunch, which is my Substack. I've written a book on food systems change, which is coming out this winter, end of June. It is being printed at the moment, which is great. And I go into all of the things that I talked about this morning, plus a lot more in that book. So look out for that one. And I hope you, have had some really good food for thought.
Kia ora, Emily. That was excellent. Really interesting stuff and scary, I would say, for a lot of people in the audience if you haven't dived into this and have just, I think for me, I was definitely in that spot of being like, I know something's going on and I'm seeing evidence of it, but it's great to kind of understand how those bigger factors are influencing our everyday shopping. And like most things in sustainability, once you look into it, you realize how complicated and how many factors influence all these different day-to-day things. And even more importantly, to kind of that further zoom out, is we just see how our unsustainable practices and our climate change and all these things are affecting our everyday lives. And so all the work that we do at SBN feeds into all these different areas. But yeah, thank you. So we're going to be getting to the question and commenting part of the session. So please feel free to ask any questions. I've already got a few here, so feel free to either pop them in the chat or we can jump on and have a conversation. So first we have one from Carolyn, who's from New Zealand Post, who says, thanks so much. Very sobering, but a discussion that needs to be had. Do you have any suggestions on what corporate type businesses can do to help in this space? Does anyone have experience of intercompany food programs or community gardens, etc.? So either of you have something to say on that one?
I guess I'll jump in here, Ayla. Carolyn, thank you for the question. As far as intercompany food programs go, I have not heard of anything. When I was first starting out in supply chain, I read a very, very interesting thesis from someone, and they called it the long epidemic around the globalization of food, and actually predicted that it would implode and we would have to go back from being and my son's studying social anthropology, so it's all quite interesting really. As we've become more and more connected and more global, we've gone from being quite generalist to quite specialist. So if you ask anyone globally what New Zealand's famous for, it's dairy and green and that sort of thing. We used to produce across the food basket in New Zealand, and this long epidemic actually predicted the globalization of the food supply chain, and then it imploding and needing for each country to go back to being a generalist and growing across the food basket. As far as, and he actually talked about community gardens, and so anywhere that had, and he tied it in with climate change, population increase. It was so interesting. Anywhere that had any carbon or any climate change where they were adding to it, they needed to have community gardens, mini forests, that sort of thing to not only combat climate change, but to actually feed people. I guess as far as a corporate type business goes, any of your waste, any of your damaged product, we'd love to talk to you at Kiwi Harvest about how we recycle that, rather than even tour recyclers back into people that are in food poverty, because we got in half a pallet of coat hangers the other day. They cost a lot of money. We've given them to women's refuges who are helping women set up new housing for themselves. So anything like that, we'd love to speak to any corporate to help keep it out of the waste stream.
Yeah, I would just add also there about intercompany and corporate. I just want people to totally think differently about the food system, and first of all understand it, but then realize your role in it. So if you're a marketing company or you're an advertising company, or you're a consultant. There are so many different companies that are involved in the food system and also complicit in a lot of things that happen in the food system, particularly in our food environments, our spatial planning. There are so many parts of the food system that walk through our lives over and above thinking about it as just food businesses in the supermarket. Food businesses have a role to play for sure, but there are thousands and thousands of other businesses that support them through other ways and can be involved. And I think once we start taking a food systems approach to our policies, our plans, and how we think about these things, which we're starting to see very slowly happen across our country with our city region food systems like Wellington or Christchurch and Auckland looking at this, there are many ways that companies and businesses can get involved with that. Over and above traditional charity models as well. And I think questioning your role is a big part of that. So that's my take on it. And as for community gardens, most communities have them. So of course you can get involved, and if there's not one there, you could start one. But it's much bigger than this for businesses. It's much bigger.
Yeah, completely agree with both of you there. And I would advise businesses who are in this space and thinking about it, there's lots of local initiatives that you could reach out to in your area that will have that kind of guidance and ways that you can support while thinking about that bigger picture also. I think we had Maren have his hand up. Maren, do you want to jump on and ask a question?
I did, thanks. Kind of following on, and it's possibly a question that goes to both Emily or Angela. Community gardens, community food libraries or drop-off points for surplus, collecting all that, I see is kind of good, getting those local grown stuff going. But when you think of products that are going out in New Zealand that we're producing, that we're then bringing them back in another form, for me, the timber one, where we send logs out and bring plywood back, is there a similar one in the food industry that we just should be doing more in New Zealand with, rather than it like being sent out as a raw product, then bringing it back as a processed good product, as opposed to the heavily modified products that we possibly don't need in our life? Or does that all come back to getting off the reliance for artificial fertilizers, which is probably one of the biggest import ingredients that we have? Is it to keep our food production going at the moment? Just interested in your thoughts, both of you, on that area.
Yeah, I mean, I can start, and Angela, if you want to go jump in. There are so many food products that get sent offshore and then come back, but traceability and transparency means you wouldn't always exactly know. What I will say is that it would be really great if we supported and encouraged leadership at an executive level in our country to develop infrastructure to process our goods so that we're not only sending them off as a raw material. And then what happens, say, with a product, I mean, it would be easy to say milk as an example, is then it's sent off as an ingredient to another country who has the infrastructure, and then that food business makes a lot more money off of that than you do sending it off, or the farmer does at the farm gate sending it off. So the further through the food chain that the product goes, the more value it creates, and the more value that creates for that business creating it. So generally speaking, in the mass global context, that's how it works. So if you can increase training and production and different manufacturing facilities here that could produce higher quality goods, that would bring more value to the food business before it gets sent off, and it would also help, I guess, shorten some of those supply chains. So that's definitely an option. We start to see some of those, but New Zealand's very small fry in that we like to send off primary ingredients or commodities like butter or dehydrated milk powder for protein shakes and things, and infant formula. We like to send it off as a raw material, not higher up. So we could, I think, do a lot better across lots of products.
Yeah, Emily, agree with you. I guess there are quite a few products that go off in their raw state, get processed overseas and do come back. And this is what I was talking about with the whole anthropology thing. We have become quite specialist in what we do and how we do it. To me, a staggering figure is that actually New Zealand produces enough food to feed 40 million people. and most of that goes overseas. Yet we've got 15% of kids that are going to school hungry, even with the school lunch program, etc. That's why I love what I do, trying to deal with some of that. But
yeah, and I think actually that kind of dovetails with that question there around, well, both of those questions in the chat from Josephine and Tim, like seeing product labeling and seeing more transparency around that and traceability. I think we will need more of that. We don't do it enough. It's hard. It's in the hard basket to label because of these complex supply chains. And this example of sending it off and it turning into something else, it's mind-boggling what goes into things and where they come from. And so they started the compulsory labeling requirements around meat, fish, and produce because it's easy and it's simple. But you know what? A lot of that stuff is actually the answer to eating healthier, eating more affordably, and solving some of these problems. Because if you do take simple ingredients like that and you know where it's from, you are yourself helping that traceability, and you're not having a highly processed, unhealthy food that you're making as well. And then as for this, kind of works in with diversifying, because yeah, there is a strong argument for diversification, and to a point, I also advocate for that myself. I think we could do well to mix it up a bit better. However, it's complicated that, you know, we have great land for growing what we grow. And there's a reason why we do that. Doesn't mean we have to do it forever, and it does mean we can innovate and change, but it's there for some reasons. And diversification, there's great examples of that across our food system. At a grower and farmer level, there's some really neat things happening. It does put slightly more pressure on the grower or the farmer if they don't have the resources. And yeah, but it can be a good income stream. Like the classic example is the Bostock's organic chicken, which is actually an apple orchard, and then the chickens went under the apple trees, and then you know, carve out your market for an organic chicken that New Zealanders were waiting for, but you've already got the land and it's already been converted to organic because it's already an established apple orchard, and the trees can continue growing. Like this is the sort of land use diversification. Yeah, and then I mean we do need to rely on trade for our economy, and we do need to rely on it for some of our foods. But what I would like to see is a rethink of how we actually do that, like our input balance of the crappy, nutrient low, high sugar, high processed foods versus exporting high quality, high nutrient dense foods is just ridiculous when, as Angela says, we have people without access to food, or also on the health front with the high rates of non-communicable diseases that we have from poor diet, from importing crappy foods. So there's so many things there that we could work on shifting, but still being able to provide food for our country. I mean, I always say we need to feed New Zealand first, and I believe that because of our climate and our soils and the way we grow things, I really believe that we can shift our own model and actually do that. It would take some tweaking and it would take some innovation, but I actually think we could still be trading in the global world and subject to that, but also we could be feeding people here better first. I really believe we can do that. And honestly, that's what we kind of need to do to rethink this food system. It's not working for people and it needs to change.
Yeah, completely agree with you both there. And also when you think of food that's getting shipped all around and the carbon footprint that comes along with that, it's quite an insane broken system that we're seeing, that it's just unsustainable on many, many different levels.
Yeah, you've got to be careful there though, Isla, because it's how it's grown that matters, not where it's grown. The transportation is pretty minimal in terms of the impact of the food. It's the land use predominantly. So there's many, many reasons to grow locally and to support your regional growers, but the reasons are not necessarily due to transport efficiencies, particularly in New Zealand.
Is that I haven't heard that take before. Do you more mean that as well, when you're supporting the local farmers, you're hoping that they are farming in a more sustainable manner across their farm instead of the transport angle of it?
So yeah, sort of. So the food miles myth, it's a myth. Like, it was debunked years ago when researchers realized that in terms of greenhouse gas emissions from the production, this comes from how the food is grown and the land use practices of that food and what the food is. So, red meat has a higher greenhouse gas impact than vegetables or whatever. But the land use practices become important. The transportation, so the shipping and the freight is relatively low impact when you look across the life cycle of that product. A percentage of it. The packaging, the retail, and the shipping is quite small. And so you can grow something abroad in very efficient growing environments and have quite efficient shipping and get it to another country, and it may and quite likely will have a better footprint than something necessarily grown in that country if it's done in a poorer environmental standard or practice, right? So you can't just say because it's grown in the Netherlands and it's shipped all the way here, and the New Zealand lamb farmers had, there is that example of New Zealand lamb being shipped to the UK and being sold there with better environmental practices, having a lower impact. That was the sort of classic story,
right,
of that they came up with. So you just have to be careful about what you're claiming. But what I do say is you can't only use climate change as a metric for measuring the impact of a food system. You've got a regional economy, you've got a local system, and if your farmers here are doing better environmental practices, then there are many reasons why you should support them. You will know more likely where the food's growing, you'll know what community initiatives they're involved in, you know who they're employing. There are so many reasons why you should support local, but it's not necessarily because of the lower emissions, the higher emissions, sorry.
Completely understand. No, that's new to me, so thank you. And also that comes right back to your both your points on that transparency of where do we get this information about knowing where our food's from, and if you're an average consumer who's not taking the time to research these companies and you're just grabbing stuff off the shelf, how do we try and improve that information to those consumers? Great, thank you guys. So we probably have time for maybe one or two more questions, so if you have anything left, please pop up your hand or pop it in the chat. But yeah, this is really interesting, and as you both were speaking, I wrote down a few questions myself. So as an average sort of consumer who's feeling the pinch here, do you have advice of ways that we can, other than kind of what you covered, Angela, the way that we can shop or support a more resilient food system while also managing to get food for our households?
Well, from my perspective, the things that we talk about are making up a menu plan and keeping the food simple. We didn't eat a highly processed diet even a couple of generations ago. So, meat and 2 veg goes a long way. Make bigger meals and take the leftovers for lunch. It's incredible. We once a month here at Kiwi Harvest, as a bit of a team building thing, we get everyone to take home one item from the warehouse, and half of the team cooks for the other half of the team. And it's incredible what you can do with a shared lunch and how many meals you can get from that. So food sharing is always another good thing, so long as you don't end up with a lot of waste, unless you've got someone taking it for other meals. And any piece of dirt can become a garden. Used tires, great for growing potatoes in.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point as well. I saw a great diagram the other day as well that showed how as we've kind of moved away from being in the garden as much and people have come to have really manicured bare lawns, that just shows as well how much of a biodiversity loss we have in those gardens, which are the green space for all these critters as we kind of have less and less of it. So being able to have a garden that's producing food while also increasing the biodiversity of your little patch of land is a great thing to do, and just again shows how connected all these systems are and how important it is to try and zoom out and have that more systems look at food instead of kind of just thinking about what you're shopping. Yeah, great. No more questions have jumped in. So do either of you have anything left to say before I close us off?
From my perspective, just from a Kiwi harvest selfish point of view, we can't do half of the work that we do without volunteers. So anyone that would be interested in coming to see what we do and volunteering with us, please be in touch. It would be great to hear from you.
Fantastic. And Emily's just popped her contact details in the chat.
Yeah, I just put that in there. You're welcome to reach out to me. Thank you, SBN, for hosting this, and Isla, and thank you, Angela, for the mahi that you do, and Kiwi Harvest. Yeah, it's great. It's nice to talk about these global issues, but bring it down to local relevance. I think it's very important in communicating our messages.
Yeah, fantastic. And I will gather some of these amazing resources that we've talked about today and pop it in an email out to all the attendees. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you both so much for your expert knowledge. It was so interesting, and I've learned so much, so I really appreciate it. So thank you, everybody, and I hope to see you at next month's Hot Take. All right, ka kite.
Ka kite.